All right. Hi, folks. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys today to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is setting up like systems in your office to provide value to your patients, but not only to your patients, but also to your practice. And so the title of my talk today is going to be Value in Motion. So how you can leverage the Carriere Motion appliance and some different technology with it to kind of impart value into those two spheres that we're talking about. So it's a meeting consumer demands with technology-driven orthodontics. I'm a private practice orthodontist. I practice in St. Louis, Missouri, or the St. Louis suburbs. I have two offices. I'm a sole practitioner. It's something I've been in practice for about 13 years now. I've been an orthodontist for nearly 16 years, but 13 of that in my private practice. So we'll share some experiences that I've had with the motion appliance in my practice, but also with my team and how they play a role in kind of executing the workflows that we found to be pretty valuable for us the last few years. So here's my crew. This is my wife, Amy, in the middle. My wife and I have two kids. Calvin, he's 17. He's a high school senior. He's going to be going to school in Texas in the fall at Texas Christian. So super excited about that for his opportunity. Super sad he's going to be leaving the house. So excited for what comes forward for him. And then my daughter Frances is 13. So we get to do high school all over again with her. So just thrilled about that. These guys mean the world to me. And my wife and I, we've been together I think we've been married for 23 years this year, but we've always known each other. This was us in our preschool graduation class of 5. She's always all the way on the right, and I'm the second from the left. So that's how long we've known each other. So there's no secrets in our house. We've known each other since almost day one. So we have the opportunity to practice together. She's a pediatric dentist and I'm the orthodontist. We kind of collaborate on a lot of things. So it's really fun. So a lot of teeth talk in our house. So I'm going to start by talking, about a story that we had in our office, which is not unlike a lot of offices in the United States. I think that, over the last few years, I don't think it's a secret that, the orthodontic industry has experienced a little bit of a stagnation in terms of growth. We experienced that well in our practice, over the course of, from 2022 and 2023, we didn't really experience a whole lot of uptick in all those metrics that you look at for a practice that's thriving. And so we decided at the end of 2023, let's kind of do an assessment and figure out, what can we do to help to reverse this tide that we're seeing in terms of like the kind of lack of growth that we'd experienced every year that we've been in practice until these 2 years had happened. I think the areas that we kind of use as growth metrics are, those areas, the classic ones, it's production, it's collections, starts, and case acceptance. And we were kind of like level playing, kind of plateaued from our, 2021 kind of numbers. And we decided, let's just kind of figure out, look at the landscape, what can we do to change things? And so we asked two questions as a team. What's changed in the orthodontic industry, and then what can we control? And that's what we really like to focus on, are the controllables. And so I think it's not this conversation's been had a lot in the last couple of years, and I think one of the some of the kind of gurus in the industry, like Chris Benson of Benson Koppel and things, have noted like these are potential kind of causes for these issues. It's like this economic uncertainty that's been kind of around for the last few years. There's been, with any kind of like stagnation of growth across the whole industry, people start being opportunistic about what they can do. And there's been a lot of competition, I think, for patients from, general practitioners, which, if they can provide a service, that's fine. But I think that's just has to be included in that calculation. Well, there's this whole like birth of direct to consumer orthodontics we've seen kind of pop up. And so I think that's probably had a little bit to do with it. And there's been a lot of industry consolidation. So I think those are kind of the main factors that you hear about when you have these conversations with people who know about the industry, will say. And so we kind of just thought like, well, what can we control? And I think that what we decided was, we can control, things within the walls of our practice, our care delivery and our care presentation. I think those are the things that we're like, hey, if we're going to really kind of turn the dials on a few things, let's control these things. Think creatively about how we can change things and see if that can make a difference in terms of less like this trend that we were seeing over the course of those years. And so I think when I was kind of preparing this, I was like thinking, well, my wife asked me, well, should growth be your goal? And I think that I think the answer is yes in my mind, and not just for growth's sake, but I think what growth allows you to do is, evolve as a practitioner. I mean, it helps you to look for ways of change and to continue to provide that exceptional value to your patients, but also kind of leave a lasting impact on your team, your community. And then, I think when you think about growth, it's not just like expansion of your practice, but I think, one of the things you can really think about is like first principles, like, are we profitable? Are we profiting? And I think when you look at profit as kind of a metric, then you can kind of take profit and you can turn it into value for your patients in terms of requiring new systems or new technologies and things like that. And so just think about first principles, what are the ways that we can increase profit? Well, I mean, classic ways you can increase prices, but I think in a market where, you know, um, conversion rates are kind of stagnant or down, I don't know if increasing prices and not providing any other value in the whole equation is really the best practice. You can increase your sales, and so if you kind of have more patients to provide your service to, that can help you grow and then further profit. But also, you can decrease your costs, and I think that's something that a lot of people think about too. Is how do we increase the margins that we have in terms of how we deliver our care? And so we started thinking about, well, if we focus on sales and costs, like what does that what kind of things do we want to have happen? And here's like a profit equation that we think about a lot, which is, if we want to focus on sales and cost, really what we want to do is increase sales and decrease costs, and maybe just hold price, to that normal kind of increase that you do every year for, inflationary kind of adjustments and things like that. So those are the things that we decided to focus on. And so the, I guess the corollary between the two, the through line was that, what about efficiency? If we could be more efficient, I can't help but think, but downstream from efficiency, you could have, the changes in, the decrease in cost of your delivery vehicle of your care, but also an increase in sales. And I think that, a lot of people don't think about efficiency being like a sales tactic, but I'm going to kind of talk about how we've kind of leveraged efficiency in our practice to help patients to kind of see us as something different than what they're seeing in other practices. And so if you just think about cost, just real quick, math equation, but if you increase your efficiency, typically you're going to decrease your costs. I mean, if you can do things, the same, provide the same service to someone, but in a more efficient way, usually the cost of providing that service will decrease. And then also, I think I'm going to make the argument that, if you increase your efficiency, it can produce sales for you, meaning that like you can kind of have that kind of differentiation piece in your community if you were the person that provides a more efficient care process. And so what can we control? Let's really focus on efficiency in terms of our care delivery, but also in our care presentation. Like really emphasize the fact that we can provide an efficient patient experience. And so when you think about efficiency in the care delivery sphere, we're going to talk about the Carriere Motion, but also a piece that I think that really kind of helps to put that efficient delivery of correction of malocclusion into overdrive, which is the remote monitoring piece. We're pretty big users of remote monitoring in our practice, and we're going to show you how we do it and how that kind of paired with Carriere Motion can be a very, very efficient care delivery model. We'll show our workflow, how we do it, and we'll just look at some KPIs on how we've seen a change in our practice in terms of efficiency at those key performance indicators. I think those are good to look at on a periodic basis just to see where you are and then compare yourself to a larger cohort of practices, and I'm going to do that. We'll show kind of how our experience has been with that, and then also care presentation piece and how we've kind of thought if we perform this kind of this different kind of delivery of care, we really need to tell people about it, and we've kind of devised a way to kind of explain our process to people through our new patient process. And I think it's been helpful for us to have those kind of positive changes in those metrics that explain growth in terms of conversion rate and treatment starts. And so let's first look at Carriere Motion and remote monitoring separate, and then kind of bring them together. So The Carriere Motion, it's something that we've been utilizing for, I think, probably 4 years as a class 2 corrector and class 3 corrector in our office. There's lots of different, malocclusion correctors on the market, but I think that this appliance just really spoke to us for a few reasons, and we're going to kind of go through why we like it, for all the benefits that it can impart to your patients in terms of like just efficiency of starting care, but also in terms of the comfort level for patients and actually what it's actually treating and how it's actually moving teeth, which makes sense to me. And so, the idea of the Carriere Motion is like this sagittal first kind of like treatment idea, which means that, if you take a malocclusion, which has a sagittal issue, whether it's a class 2 or class 3, you're going to focus on the most difficult part of that case, which is basically correcting the malocclusion at the molar level and at the canine level. And so getting those two tooth positions from whatever malocclusion it is, a class 2 or class 3, and converting that to a class 1 prior to starting braces care or aligner care will then make the time that you're in either the braces or aligners that much smaller. It'll kind of shrink the amount of time that you're in those appliances. And most patients are receptive to that. If you can explain it in that way, I think that most patients are like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. And so that's kind of how we're going to kind of utilize this tooth movement piece, but also explain to patients that this is really in their benefit to use an appliance like this. So what the kind of like 4 tenets of Sagittal First is that, it standardizes and simplifies treatment. So it utilizes the same treatment protocol no matter the malocclusion type. So it's a similar kind of tooth movement modality regardless of the malocclusion, and I think it simplifies your planning because it just kind of goes after the things that need to be corrected in these malocclusion, eliminates lab time. And it, by front loading the hardest part of the treatment, which is how we kind of verbiage it, you're going to shave off that hardest part of the treatment and you're going to put it into the front of the treatment. And I think that's going to make you more efficient in the long run. And I think one of the most unique things about it is that like it's the only class 2 corrector that I know that you can do a same day start with. And I think that offering same day starts in your practice, whether you do it or not, I think it's undeniable to think that like that's a very convenient way of delivering care to patients. Allowing them to come in and have a case presentation given to them, and then have the ability to actually start care that same day, kind of eliminates future visits, which can be an efficiency for those patients that a lot of them appreciate. And I think with Carriere Motion, you can do that with your class 2 corrector, which is a big differentiator when you compare it to other class 2 correctors. And I think it just gives you some more options for treatment. I think that a lot of times, if you think, well, if I can get this case to from class 2 to class 1, maybe I could treat it with aligners, and that's kind of where your comfort zone is. So it gives you some more options to say, let's correct this class 2 to class 1 or class 3 to class 1 first, and then we'll provide you with some options for either braces or aligners. So I think it expands the level of options that you can provide for patients. And so here's how the setups look. You have this bar that is kind of going from canine to molar or first premolar to molar, depending on the nature of how you set up. There's 2 different configurations for it. But on the upper arch for class 2s, it's going to go from molar to canine, and then they'll have a piece on the bottom, whether that's a bonded bracket or if it's a lower lingual holding arch. You can set it up that way that you'll wear elastic from the top to the bottom, and then you're going to work on those 2 kind of tooth sets on the upper arch to kind of put them into the ideal location. It's the flip for the class 3 treatment setup. And so elastics connect from the top to the bottom, and you would kind of wear those elastics just like you would wear elastics with braces care. So when we see it in action, you can see that what happens is, the upper first molar kind of rotates into the correct position. You correct this AP to a class 1 molar and class 1 cuspid for a class 2 patient. And then you can see some resolution of the crowding in the upper anterior segment, just through, the tooth movement on the canine area kind of moving back into the class 1 position. You'll see kind of the incisors kind of spread out through that like tissue connections that are between them over time. And so you can even see some flaring reduction between the before picture and after picture here, which we really love. So you're kind of, I would love to treat class 1 spacing cases all day long. I think those are some of the easiest to treat. So why not make these hard, malocclusion cases into easier malocclusion cases before you put the braces on? I think that's just a winning proposition for everyone. And so the way that this is able to work is, most molars that we have for class 2, let's just talk about class 2s. Most molars for class 2s have this like mesial rotation. I think that's been known for a while. This picture was lifted from a classic orthodontic article that shows, if you can roll that molar back, you're going to get some millimeters of space back. And the way that the Carriere Motion is able to do this is it has kind of a pivot point on the bracket that's connected to the molar. So as the forces put to that molar position, you'll see the molar kind of rotate back, and it's allowed to do that through the kind of ball pivot that it has on the appliance. And to my knowledge, it's only class 2 corrector that has like, a focus on that molar rotation. So if most of the molar issues are like that rotation that you see, it makes sense to me that you will kind of go after the thing that's you'll take the abnormal to the normal with this appliance. And so there's just one of the classic articles by Vittetti and Frankie is, the idea that like 84% of the of patients that have a class 2 malocclusion, have this molar rotation. So, and if you correct that molar rotation, you're going to have, this like 2 millimeter to 3 millimeter gain. 84% is a lot. And so I think that, having that out of the way first will give you so much more ability to kind of unravel crowding or to correct the thing that needs to be corrected in a lot of these cases. That's why I think that the Motion is just such a valuable appliance for this kind of correction. So when we look at kind of the treatment workflow in the traditional sense, you have 23 to 24 months in braces. You have these kind of different phases or whatever, however you kind of classify your journey through braces, is to, you're working up to the point where you can start a correction. And then you kind of put the AP correction at the end of the treatment standard of the treatment protocol. But with Sagittal First, it's just that you kind of lift that AP correction out and you put it in the front of your correction. And there's lots of advantages to that. And I think, what we found is, and I think anecdotally, I see this all the time in my patients is, their compliance or the enthusiasm is kind of at its highest peak at the start of the treatment. And so I like to take advantage of that enthusiasm if we can, with elastics, with this appliance, so we can kind of take advantage of that and get as much kind of movement for the time we spend. And so that's kind of the power of that Sagittal First thought process. We'll revisit that in a second. So let's talk about the dental monitoring piece. And so, dental monitoring, you probably know, but we'll kind of just, kind of talk about it a little bit here. It's an app that lives on your phone. That's how we explain it to patients. Is a kit that you can put the phone into, and then you use the app to walk through a picture set on a weekly basis. And these pictures come to our office onto a dashboard. And the dashboard is a progression of all of the pictures that they take from week to week. There's an AI piece in it, and the AI piece will help us to set goals for, to let us know certain tooth movements that happen, wire passivity, tooth position. A lot of valuable information comes through this dashboard. And so we use it on every patient in our practice, both braces patients, aligner patients, motion patients. But I think it's especially helpful for our motion patients, and we'll kind of walk through that here in a second. And so if you marry these two together, then you have this really powerful malocclusion correction treatment modality where you can, really eliminate a lot of the inefficiencies that exist in either just braces and rubber bands alone, or alternative class 2 correctors just by themselves. And so that's what we wanted to do is really kind of double down on the efficiency of the two, put them together and kind of see what we get out of it. And so let's talk about the workflow that we use in our practice. So the goal for us in efficiency of treatment in a general sense was we decided let's try to decrease the number of visits that we see. Let's try to decrease the compliance issues that we have, and let's decrease the treatment time. So let's just kind of try to deliver that kind of point A to point B in as short a time span as possible, and by focusing on these three aspects. And so if you look at like the class 2, like the traditional class 2 corrector, whether it's Amara or Herbst or Twin Block or what have you, the traditional flow is from the TC room, you send a lab script off to an external lab, and then 4 to 6 weeks later you return, you receive that appliance back in the office, and you have the patient scheduled, and you start the treatment. And so that's kind of the traditional model that's existed for decades now when using class 2 correctors. But I think the nice thing about motion is you can go from the TC room, your in-house lab can fabricate a lower retainer piece that will go on the lower arch. We'll talk about that in a second. And you can start that same day if you have those kind of workflows in place. And so I think that's just a really wonderful option to provide for your patients. I don't really think that they have a whole lot of interest in waiting, a month and a half to start treatment. They want to start it now, and they want to get the journey going. And so to be able to offer that to patients, I think is extremely valuable. It's definitely a differentiator in your community. And so our workflow for our same day starts is we measure for the motion appliance. We place our buttons on the lower molars. We place the motion appliance, and we onboard the patient onto dental monitoring. So while that's happening at the chair, back in our in-house lab, we're 3D printing models, and we're making our lower kind of thermoplastic retainer to go on the lower arch to secure the lower teeth. And so if you remember the setup for the motion appliance, it has the bar from upper molar to canine. And the lower arch, it has the hookups to the molars with the bondable buttons. So in order to ensure that the molars do not move during elastic wear, you have to secure that with either a lower thermoplastic retainer or a lower lingual holding arch. And so if you do a thermoplastic retainer, then you can have that produced same day, and you can go ahead and put that in, and you're confident those teeth will not move on the lower arch. And so that's our workflow. We can get that all done in about 45 minutes to an hour. It takes us about, I think we timed it the other day, it was like 37 minutes to produce the thermoplastic retainer for the lower arch. We provide the patient with the model. They can take it home with them. If they ever lose the thermoplastic retainer, they just come back and we reproduce it for them. And so I think the workflow works really well. And so really what we're doing is, like we were talking about before, we're taking this AP correction and we're just front loading it to the front of the patient journey. And that's where we get into that idea of, decreasing compliance issues, is like just put us in the best circumstance to kind of hit the ball out of the park. And so that's why I love kind of front loading the hardest part of the treatment to the front when we can get the best cooperation from patients. And if you can do that, then you can spend less time on the other parts, like braces, where it's incumbent upon you to spend as minimal amount of time possible in braces, because the longer we're in braces, the more likelihood for negative aspects to happen. And so we look at like traditional kind of class 2 corrector kind of treatment workflow. You go from inserting that appliance, you have the patient back every 6 or 8 weeks to check the appliance, see how the correction's going. Maybe that's 3 to 4 visits over the 6-month time span that it could take to kind of get to the correction that you want. And then you decide, okay, let's go ahead and start braces, take the appliance out and start your braces. That could be 3 to 4 visits in your office. And I think that's kind of the classic treatment workflow for class 2 correctors. But really with motion, if you couple that with dental monitoring, really what you're doing is you're placing the motion appliance, off of a same day start. you're putting them onto dental monitoring, and then what you're doing is you're eliminating all of those visits to check to see if the correction has occurred or not. You're really just putting everything in place, and then the next visit that they come into your office will be to put braces on. So you could potentially eliminate 3 to 4 visits just right there in the front of your treatment delivery by kind of coupling these two together. I think that's powerful. And we'll talk about what that looks like from a KPI perspective in a little bit. Okay, so the advantages of marrying these two together for me are you can do a same day start. You're going to kind of enhance the patient compliance because you're going to get the patient at the most compliant time that they're going to be in treatment. You're really going to focus on one of the major issues with these types of patients, which is the molar rotation aspect of things. You're going to create this class 1 platform before you kind of go into either your aligners or your braces. So you have much easier malocclusion to correct once you've kind of passed the stage of the class 2 correction. And you're going to decrease the number of visits. And so I think all of those together, I think are reasons enough to kind of think about, kind of marrying these two together in your office. So let's just kind of take a look at what this looks like on a few patients. And so this is Riley, almost a full step class 2. This was the day that we onboarded her with her Carriere Motion appliance. We put it in, we went ahead and got her onboarded onto dental monitoring. And so I'll just kind of walk you through a little bit of dental monitoring. What we do that day too is we go in and we set some goals. And so there's a component to dental monitoring where goals can be set and goals are monitored basically through an AI piece. So it's going to look at teeth from week to week and see when the tooth actually achieves a certain kind of malocclusion correction. And so we can set these goals up and just let it go. And then once it sees that the correction has occurred, it will let us know. You can also set a time point so that, like, if the class 2 to class 1 correction doesn't happen over a certain period of time, then you can set a weekly parameter and say, like, hey, just force me to look at this in 12 weeks if it doesn't get to where we want it to go. But what you can also do is you can also trigger an alert for letting the patient know when they're supposed to do something. So as with the Carriere Motion appliance, it's rubber band driven. And so the idea is you kind of start out with like a lighter rubber band. We usually do that for 6 weeks. The Carriere Motion reference is a force 1 appliance or a force 1 elastic. And then you can go to like the stronger rubber band after the 6-week mark. So we just set up a 42-day reminder for the patient that says, hey, the patient's been in their motion appliance for about 6 weeks. It's time to switch to the stronger version of the rubber bands, which we've supplied them when we go ahead and onboard them with the motion appliance. And so with Riley, we just said, hey, hey Riley, Dr. Varble would like you to switch your elastics to cheetahs, which is the equivalent to like a force 2 or a stronger rubber band that we gave you at your first visit with us. They'll be hooked up in the same way. Feel free to message us if you have any questions. And so that's the nice thing about dental monitoring here. You can kind of jump in with little messaging to patients to give them signs of encouragement and whatnot. Really close to the point where she's going to have the correction. You can see how much movement has happened over the course of the time that she's been in treatment. So we just kind of shot her a little message to say, just want to let you know that you'll be ready for braces in about a month. Our desk will be calling your parents to schedule that. In the meantime, continue wearing your rubber bands and doing your weekly scans. This is something that you'll be continuing to do even with braces. And our dental monitoring coordinator, Shelby, kind of noted that she was sending that message. So we can kind of just let them know, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Light at the end of the tunnel here. We'll get you into braces soon. And then after that month, we were where we wanted to be. We moved from almost a full step class 2 to class 1 platform, and we're ready to go with braces. And so we put braces on. This is her first scan with braces on. We're getting going with tooth movement. And so, the nice thing about the monitoring is they can ask questions too. So she asked a question, right after braces on, hey, is it okay to drink soda with braces? And we said, we do recommend that you stay away from soda and whatnot. So it's kind of nice to encourage them. That will also increase patient compliance too. If they know they have you there watching what you're doing, I think people are more likely to kind of like, we kind of expect what we inspect, right? And I think people are more likely to, do what we ask of them if they know that we're watching them. And so, other things we can kind of do is like just let them know that like, hey, brushing in this area is not so hot. You need to pick it up, kind of thing. So from March to July, this is how much movement we had with the motion. Riley hit it out of the park. She did a really good job with patient compliance, but most patients do in our experience. They do a really good job with elastic wear. And so this is her completed case. It was motion appliance for about 4 months, braces for 13 months, 9 visits. For a full step class 2 correction, I'll take that all day long. I was really happy with her result. And so just another case where we had a correction that we did a little bit like that kind of alternative version of the motion appliance where we use it off of the first premolar. The reason we did that is the kind of canine on the other side of the mouth was kind of rotated. So we just found like it was a better fit onto the teeth if we use the premolar, but we went from like kind of full step to, correction from February to June. And I just want to show that kind of sky view. This is from the dental monitoring platform. This is one of the views that they take in the dental monitoring piece, and it's like an occlusal view. You can see how much movement we've had, how much separation we have of the first premolars from the canines over that time. Just kind of a beautiful amount of movement. And then we have, all the movement, all the space in the world to kind of unravel that crowding when which we jump into braces. And so this was the completed case. You went from a full step class 2 to that class 1 correction in 14 months. And so, or 18 months total. So 4 months in motion and 14 months in braces, 10 visits. And so super happy with the result here. And so here's just another one where we have same kind of idea, maybe a half step class 2, but from June to September, we were into our class 1 correction, moving into braces. And the sequence of events went, 3 months in motion, 12 months in braces, total of 15 months, 7 visits. And so really efficient care delivery for full step class 2. Something that I really can't do with just braces and rubber bands alone. And I don't really have the same experience from other class 2 correctors of getting to the endpoint this quickly and with this few visits. So you can also use it for alternative malocclusion correction 2, the class 3. So we had dentist kid as a patient. Dentist was concerned that we might have to do like surgery on this patient. He did have a skeletal class 3, but he wasn't really interested in doing surgery. He's like, "What can you do for us?" And I was like, "Well, let's try the motion." If you'll notice, this is a class 2 motion appliance. The class 2 and class 3 differ a little bit in that they don't have the kind of molar pivot point, but we didn't have the size in our office. We just used a class 2 Carriere Motion on the lower, and it worked just fine. You can see how much correction we got from December to March. You went from more than a full step class 3 to class 2 actually in that amount of time, just through really great rubber band wear. And so 3 months in motion, 15 months in braces, 10 visits. I don't think I would have been able to do this with braces alone. And that's kind of the main thing. And then also it's definitely with that number of visits for sure. And so let's look at some of the KPIs of this kind of type of care delivery. And so really where we look at is we have our sagittal first, and we have our treatment. But really, I think the most important thing is the differential between the standard protocol and the sagittal first protocol. It's this area. What lives in that area where, one cohort of patients is out of braces, living their best life and retainers, and the other one's still trudging along, maybe have just started their AP correction and are still working to an endpoint. What's gained through that from that? And so the KPIs we wanted to look at were like, months in treatment, the number of visits, that value per visit, which is always kind of a key metric that you hear consultants talk about. And then this overestimated completion time. I think that's something that's like kind of been often overlooked. How much over an estimated completion time do we see with patients in our office? And that's a really big indicator of your efficiency of your care delivery. And so in 2024, I wanted to look at, we started, if you remember, 2023, we decided to make this change. And so 2024, we had all of our patients that were in motion were kind of treated during that year. So we wanted to look at, our metrics for that. So we went on with Gauge. If you don't know what Gauge is this, basically it's a third party kind of KPI dashboard that will pull metrics from your practice management software, put them into like, a nice, all these different metrics and let you see kind of where your practice is at. So it's kind of a good, like a pulse of where your practice is at from a data standpoint. And what they do is they service, over 2,000 orthodontic practice locations in the country. And I think, people that are, clients of Gage are probably practitioners that care a lot about, practice, how their practice runs, enough to kind of invest in like teaming with Gage to have that be a part of their practice. So I would hazard a guess that they're probably pretty good at being efficient about treatment. So what I wanted to do is like look at, use the Gage data, which they'll let you compare your practice to, different cohorts, whether it's your regional, like I'm in the MSO, so I could compare my practice to the MSO or the country as a whole. And so that's what I decided to do. Let's go ahead. I went ahead and compared, all treatments that were done in 2024 that were comprehensive, full phase treatments to the 50 Carriere Motion patients that I had. It's kind of an unfair comparison because, if I'm using Carriere Motion on a patient, they're usually a malocclusion that's, somewhat taxing. It's a class 2 or class 3 malocclusion that's significant enough that I think we need help outside of just braces and rubber bands alone. But I'm not comparing kind of apples to apples here. I'm comparing all of the treatments. That's the, class 1 crowdeds, that's the class 1 spaces, that's the harder cases from all the practices to my kind of, I would say, a harder cohort to compare to. But I just wanted to see, for my own personal reasons, to see kind of how efficient we are when we compare the two. So I pulled out the data. And so for months in treatment, the national average in 2024, according to Gage, for the practices that are under their umbrella, was 26 months. And so I was kind of shocked by that. But with our motion patients, which are these typically, I would say, the most difficult malocclusions in my practice, our average months in treatment was 19. And so the difference between the two is 7 months shorter. I would always like to have somebody in treatment 7 months shorter than, the alternative. And so let's look at the number of visits. Of course, that's going to be reflected in this. So the number of visits on national average of all malocclusion corrections that they're doing is 18 visits. And so with our motion patients, so that group of 50 was 11 visits. So it's 7 fewer visits. And so that's going to be reflected in our value per visit, of course. So I didn't put my fee structure up here. I just put the national average fee for a full treatment. And I assume that that's what our fee is too, to compare apples to apples here. And so with 18 visits versus 11 visits, kind of fleshing that out compared to the, a total fee structure, you're going to have, a value per visit, which is about $353 for the national average. And I think, Gage kind of recommends to be in that $310 range. So, nationally, I think doing pretty good in terms of the value per visit. But look at where we're at with our Carriere Motion patients. We're at $579. I mean, that's just amazing. I was kind of blown away by that. I'm glad I put this talk together because it really forced me to look at these numbers in a way that like I can really see, how efficient are we being? And that just blew me away. So I was really happy with those numbers. And so I think the other thing I wanted to look at was, estimated completion time. And so, this is where, we promise to deliver care in a certain amount of time and, are we over that promise? And so I think the national average, I don't have that number up here, but the national average, estimated treatment time was around 22 months. Ours is 18. And so the national average of full treatment was, the percentage that was over the estimated completion time was 27%. That's just a horrible inefficiency, I think. I think either we're, over promising and under delivering. We need to think about what we're kind of mentioning to our patients about how long treatment's going to be, or we're just inefficient in our care delivery, or both. But we were only 11% of our cases were over our estimated treatment time, and our Carriere Motion patients are estimated to be done in 18 months. So that's those full step class 2s that used to take me 24 to 30 months. We're at 18 months, and we're hitting that mark pretty close to it. So I'm pretty happy with that. And so, what can we control? We can control our care delivery, or we can control our care presentation. And so we talked about Carriere Motion and remote monitoring. talked about our workflows, and then we kind of looked a little bit at the KPIs. Let's talk about care presentation, and let's like talk about how we kind of crafted an offer based off this kind of this marriage of the motion appliance and the dental monitoring piece. And so we kind of decided, let's go into our new patient process and like speak differently about the care that we're providing. And so we revisited these themes that we saw as like potential causes for this lack of growth in the orthodontic industry. One of the things that we saw was that like there just seems to be a change in the consumer mindset. One thing that we noticed was, there's like this emphasis on this convenience economy, this Amazonification of everything, where people kind of want things as convenient as they can possibly get it. But also, people are still spending money in this economy. I think they're just spending on things that they value. So there's this mindset of like value-oriented spending. And so that's where I think, people are willing to go to like a direct-to-consumer, company to get aligners mailed to them. It's convenient, and they're willing to pay money for it because it's, they find a value in the time saved. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to think about that when we're kind of considering our offers to patients. And so the theme we found was like, value and convenience need to be top of mind when we're crafting, like, what are we offering our patients? And one of the, really neat kind of ways of thinking about this is this value equation that was produced by this kind of business guru named Alex Hormozy. And so this is his kind of thought process on value, your value offer to anything you're potentially trying to kind of like deliver to either as a service or in our terms, this care that we're providing. You have this idea of like you want to kind of maximize the things on the numerator, and you want to like make the denominator as small as possible to maximize value. So dream outcome would be like what the patient intends to get out of coming to your practice. Straight teeth, pretty smile, good bite, and then what is their perception that they're going to achieve that dream outcome at your office. So if you can increase their perception that like, hey, I'm going to get what I want to get at this office, then their kind of value idea of that is going to increase. And then, if you can decrease the amount of time it takes to achieve that outcome, or you can decrease the amount of effort and sacrifice it takes to get that outcome, then you're going to increase value as well. So I'm a firm believer that, people want the outcome that they're seeking when they come to your practice, and they want it to be done as quick as possible, and they want it to be done as easy as possible. They don't want to have any more visits than they need to have when they come to your office. So if you can deliver that in a more efficient way, then I think it's going to be something that they're going to put a lot of value in, and they're going to be willing to, make the investment financially to do so. But also, you want to kind of paint a picture of the perception, like that they can perceive that that's actually going to happen in your practice. I think that starts in the treatment consult room. And so we started thinking about the TC room and how we're going to kind of reframe things. I took a lot from this book by Daniel Pink called To Sell is Human. I love the book. I love Daniel. Very widely known author on business topics, but he has this idea of non-sales selling. He says, well, the goal is not to push, but to guide and help patients find clarity. And so he kind of talks about non-sales selling as the new kind of paradigm in like healthcare delivery. And so it's not a sales process, just kind of a guidance process to show them like how things are different in terms of what you're offering versus other places. And so he has this concept of the Pixar pitch. And so he kind of tells a story of when Pixar was first starting, there was this division between creative and the executive part of Pixar, this very famous film studio that made so many great animated movies. And so one of the ways that they would communicate with each other was when the creative department wanted to come up with an idea for a story, they had to package it in a specific way to send it up the chain to the executive part of the company before they would kind of green light the project. And they wanted to frame it very simply so they could understand the idea of the story. And so it started with this kind of premise. And so this was the Pixar pitch, which was, once upon a time, every day, one day, because of that, until finally, and then there was like a resolution. And so that was how every story in the early days of Pixar would be pitched up the chain, if you will, to the executive department, from Cars to Finding Nemo. And so we decided, hey, that's the kind of structure that we need to have to the story we're telling of the care that we deliver. And so here's our Carriere Motion remote monitoring pitch that we came up with. This is not a script. We don't say this verbatim, but just basically the concept that we're thinking about when we're talking to patients about the care process. So once upon a time, we would use cumbersome headgear or extract teeth to correct overbites. We would also see patients every month for orthodontic visits. Every day, patients were expected to leave school, practice, or work to make those appointments. One day, we decided to try something bold and incorporate two pieces of technology into our practice: the motion appliance and remote monitoring. Because of that investment and innovation, we were able to focus on patient comfort and convenience. Because of that, patients were happier, and office visits were no longer every month, but only when necessary, until finally patients could expect to receive their dream outcome as quickly as possible with less effort and sacrifice. And so that's the kind of narrative that we're talking about in our treatment coordinator room. And so that marriage of these two really cool technologies. And so I think that, if you marry these two together, you're going to create an efficiency in your office that's going to have a downstream effect on, increasing your value per visit, which is going to drive down your costs. It's going to allow you to have this offer that you can present to patients that's going to be a differentiator in your community, and it's going to increase your sales. And so for us, this change, was just a part of a lot of changes that we made, but it was a big factor in how in that year we were up in all four of these metrics that we had been either stagnant or down in the 2 previous years. And so we're super excited about this change and how we kind of had these growth metrics have an uptick because of it. And so I challenge you to think about, what would your strategy be in 2025? I think for 2024, for a lot of practices, it looked very similar to 2022 and 2023, but for us, it didn't. It looked very different. And I think, there is some optimism in terms of 2025, kind of a rebound effect in orthodontics, but I feel like it requires some effort. I feel like it requires some creativity to implement some systems that will provide, that offer to patients that's a differentiator, that imparts value into your process, both for your patients, but also for your system. And so I think that, if you do those changes in your office, you'll see some really great results. And I think it's an exciting time to be an orthodontist because of that. I do have some education opportunities. I love to share what we're doing in our office. I love to consume what other people are doing in their office. So I kind of created my own kind of platform for that. This is my website. It's called Evolve Orthodontic Education. The QR code takes you to the website. This is also the URL if you want to enter that in. We have a weekly blog. We have some online course opportunities that are focused on remote monitoring and efficiencies. And this is my Instagram handle. I love to kind of put things out on Instagram and also consume Instagram content from other practitioners too. So you can reach me there, DM me there. So I appreciate the time, but I really think you should think about, how can we make our practice different? How can we make our practice more efficient? And what are those opportunities that we have to impart value to our patients using the motion appliance? Thank you, folks.